I was in shock. My own son turned against me. I was not allowed to set foot in the childhood home I had grown up in. My daughter-in-law was trying to take everything from me. She almost won. It was very close. But in the end, she got what was coming to her. My name is Sarah, and this is my story of how my daughter-in-law tried to steal my inheritance and turn my son against me. I am sharing my story today and timeless justice. She looked me dead in the eye and told me my own mother's address book was just data, and she'd already thrown it out. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood there with a baby booty in one hand and a quiet, steady fire in my chest, watching this polished little stranger rearrange my life like it was a real estate brochure. My son's wife, the viper in yoga pants, she thought she was winning, smirking at the door, rewriting history one spreadsheet at a time, feeding my boy lines like they were gospel. But no one erases a mother without a fight. She doesn't know what's coming yet, but she will. And when the mask cracks and the lies spill into daylight, the clean white walls she built on our backs are going to crumble fast. The call came on a Tuesday, gray like the sky, like the feeling that had been sitting in my chest for weeks as Mom faded. David, my husband, held my hand while the hospice nurse spoke, her voice a soft, practiced kindness that still felt like a razor. Mom was gone. Her house, the small 2-bedroom where I'd measured my height against the kitchen door frame, and Mark, my son, had taken his first wobbly steps, suddenly felt like a hollow monument. It wasn't just the quiet, though that was a shock, after years of Mom's cheerful chatter and the television always murmuring in the background. It was the air itself, thick with her absence, the scent of her rose-scented soap and old books, now just a ghost on the breeze from an open window. David was a rock. He handled the calls, the arrangements, his quiet strength, a buffer against the sharp edges of fresh grief. Mark flew in the next day, his face etched with a sadness that mirrored my own. And with him came Chloe, my daughter-in-law of 2 years. She was all appropriate sorrow, a hand on Mark's arm, a quiet, "Sarah, I'm so sorry." Her eyes, though, seemed to skate over me, over the worn armchair Mom loved, over the slightly crooked painting of a seascape in the hall. It was a flicker, nothing more, but it snagged at the edge of my awareness, a tiny dissonant note in the symphony of grief. The first few days were a blur of condolences and casseroles. Neighbors Mom had known for 40 years, friends from her bridge club, their faces kind, their words a balm. Through it all, Chloe was efficient. She'd field the door, offer coffee, her movements precise. "Let me handle that, Sarah," she'd say, a little too quickly. When Mrs. Henderson from next door offered to help sort through Mom's mail, it was meant to be helpful, I told myself. She was just trying to spare me. But a small, tight knot began to form in my stomach, an unfamiliar tension in the house that had always been my sanctuary. The looming issue wasn't just Mom's things. It was a shift in the air, a subtle claim being staked. The funeral was behind us. The last of the well-meaning relatives had departed, leaving an echoing quiet. David had to go back to his engineering firm for a critical project, promising to return on the weekend. Mark was due to fly out in a few days. "We should probably start going through some things, Mom," he said, his voice still rough with unshed tears. "Just the important papers for now, maybe." I nodded, grateful. The thought of tackling it alone was overwhelming. We sat at Mom's old kitchen table, the linoleum cool beneath my elbows. Chloe joined us, a yellow legal pad and a pen in her hand. "I can make a list," she offered. "For probate, you know, it's good to be organized." Her organizational skills were, I had to admit, impressive. As Mark and I sifted through drawers, finding old insurance policies, bank statements, the deed to the house, Chloe categorized everything with a focused intensity. But her questions started to stray. "This antique dresser in the guest room, Sarah, do you know if it's a genuine Hepplewhite? Some of those can be quite valuable." Or, "The silver tea set, is it sterling?" Mark, bless his heart, just seemed relieved someone was taking charge of the practicalities. "Chloe's really good at this stuff, Mom," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. I tried to smile. Yes, she is. But her interest felt less like a cataloging of memories and more like an appraisal. She'd run a perfectly manicured finger along a dusty picture frame, not looking at the photo, but at the frame itself. "You know," she said one afternoon, ostensibly to Mark, but loud enough for me to hear from the living room where I was sorting a box of Mom's knitting, "this neighborhood is really up and coming. A little updating, new kitchen, maybe knock out a wall here. This place could fetch a premium." I froze, a half-finished baby booty clutched in my hand. A premium? Mom's house wasn't a commodity. It was Mom. The scent of her lavender sachets still clung to the linen closet. The worn patch on the arm of her favorite chair was a map of countless quiet evenings. Chloe's words landed like stones in a still pond, shattering the fragile piece I was trying to reconstruct. Mark didn't respond immediately, and I held my breath. The next day, Chloe suggested she and Mark tackle the attic. "You rest, Sarah," she said, her smile perfectly pleasant. "It'll be dusty up there. We can bring down anything that looks important." I was a librarian by trade. Dust and forgotten things were my territory. But I was tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that grief grinds into you. I let them go. Later, I heard their voices, muffled, from the attic access in the hallway. Chloe's was a low murmur, too indistinct to make out words, punctuated by Mark's occasional or "really?" It went on for a good hour. I tried to busy myself, sorting through a box of Mom's recipe cards, each one a small handwritten piece of my childhood. But the murmur from above was a constant distraction, a background hum of unease. When they came down, Mark looked thoughtful, different. Chloe was brisk. "Not much up there, mostly old clothes and some holiday decorations. We made a pile for donation." That evening, after Chloe had gone to bed early, complaining of a headache, Mark sat with me in the living room. The television was off. The silence felt heavier now, less comforting. "Chloe was saying," he began, then paused, looking at his hands. "She was saying that it's a lot for you to manage, Mom. This house, all of Mom's things. Probate can be a nightmare if you don't know what you're doing." I waited. "She thinks," well, we were talking, "and she feels it might be less stressful for you if she and I took the lead on the estate. She's offered to talk to a lawyer she knows, someone who specializes in this." My stomach tightened. "Mark, I appreciate that, but I'm capable, and David will help." "I know, Mom, I know, but Chloe's really organized, and she's right. You've been through so much. Maybe it would be easier to let us handle the practical side, so you can just focus on, you know." He gestured vaguely, meaning grieving, I supposed. His words were reasonable on the surface, but they felt rehearsed, like lines fed to him. I thought of Chloe's murmur from the attic, the careful planting of seeds. "I'll think about it, honey," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. He seemed relieved, leaning back against the sofa, too relieved. Mark flew back to his life, his job, his wife, a few days later. Chloe stayed on for another week, ostensibly to help me get things started. Her help consisted mostly of making lists, asking pointed questions about Mom's finances, and subtly rearranging small items in the house. A vase moved from the mantel to a side table, a stack of Mom's favorite magazines tidied away into a cupboard. Small things, but each one felt like a tiny erasure. One afternoon I was looking for Mom's address book. I knew she kept it in the drawer of the telephone table in the hall. It wasn't there. "Chloe," I called out, "have you seen Mom's address book?" She appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Oh, that old thing? It was so out of date, Sarah. I started a new spreadsheet for contacts, much more efficient. It's on my laptop." "But I wanted to look through it," I said, a ridiculous lump forming in my throat. There were notes in the margins, birthdays. Chloe's smile was patient, the kind one might use on a slightly confused child. "Don't worry, I'm transferring all the important data. We can print you a copy if you like." The important data. Not Mom's familiar scrawl, not the little doodles she made next to names of people she was particularly fond of. Just data. I felt a surge of anger, so sharp and sudden it surprised me. "I'd prefer the original, Chloe, please." Her smile tightened. "Well, I think I put it in the recycling. The bin went out this morning." She turned back to the kitchen. Recycling. Mom's life, her connections, reduced to recyclable material. Later that evening, I was on the phone with Mark. I tried to explain how I was feeling, the subtle ways Chloe was taking over, making decisions without consulting me. "She's just trying to be efficient, Mom," Mark said, his voice already tinged with that faint impatience I was starting to dread. "Chloe's very practical. She thinks it's a lot for you, being in the house, all those memories. She said you seemed a bit overwhelmed." Overwhelmed? I nearly choked on the word. "Mark," she threw out Mom's address book. There was a pause. Then I heard Chloe's voice, faintly, in the background, on his end. Murmuring. Mark came back on the line. "Mom, Chloe says it was falling apart. She's making a new one for you. Look, she's just trying to help us move forward. Maybe she has a point. It is a lot for you to handle emotionally right now." My heart plummeted. That wasn't Mark's phrasing. Emotionally right now. Those were Chloe's words, her assessment, delivered through my son's mouth. The crack in the foundation, the one I'd sensed when Mom first passed, suddenly felt like it was widening, threatening to swallow me whole. Was this how it started? This slow erosion of my son, my memories, my own mother's home? A cold dread settled in. Mark was already looking at me through her eyes. I hung up the phone, the dial tone a mocking buzz in my ear. My son, my Mark, was speaking with Chloe's voice, reflecting her cold, practical assessment of my grief. The house felt suddenly colder, the shadows deeper. It wasn't just Mom I was losing. A new, insidious battle was beginning, and I was terrifyingly unsure if I had the strength to fight it, or even who my opponent truly was. The days that followed were a quiet torment. Chloe had returned home to Mark, but her influence lingered like a cloying perfume in Mom's house. Every decision about the estate, every piece of mail, every query from the lawyer she'd insisted we use, seemed to be filtered through her. Mark would call, and his updates were always prefaced with, "Chloe thinks," or "Chloe suggested." I tried to assert myself, to remind him that I was Mom's executor, that David and I were perfectly capable. But my words seemed to bounce off an invisible shield he'd erected, a shield reinforced by Chloe's constant whispers. The probate process was inching along, a glacier of paperwork and legal jargon. All I wanted, with a desperate, aching need, was a small, specific piece of my past. A battered shoebox tucked away on the top shelf of Mom's bedroom closet, filled with old photographs, snapshots of me with scraped knees and pigtails, Mark as a gap-toothed toddler clutching a beloved teddy bear, Mom and Dad on their honeymoon, young and impossibly glamorous. These weren't assets to be itemized. They were fragments of our heart. I mentioned it to Mark during one of our stilted phone calls. "I'd like to get that box of old photos from Mom's closet," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "There are some I'd love to look through." "Oh, right," he said. A pause. I could almost hear the mental consultation. "Well, Chloe's got everything pretty organized there now, Mom. She's inventoried the contents of all the closets for the estate. She said it's probably best not to disturb things until the lawyer gives the okay on personal effects." "Disturb things?" My voice rose slightly. "Mark, they're family photos. They have no monetary value for the estate. I just want to see them." "I know, Mom, but Chloe's really trying to do this by the book. She doesn't want any complications." His tone was placating, but firm. The implication was clear. I was the potential complication. Frustration, sharp and hot, pricked at me. David, bless him, tried to reason with Mark, too. "Son, your mother just wants some pictures. It's hardly going to derail the entire probate process." But Mark was immovable, parroting Chloe's concerns about maintaining the integrity of the estate inventory. Integrity. As if a box of loving memories could somehow corrupt it. I felt like I was shouting into a void. My own son, treating me like a liability. I couldn't stand it. The thought of Chloe's sterile, organizing hands having pawed through those precious images, cataloging them like impersonal artifacts, made me physically ill. One chilly Saturday morning, I decided I'd had enough. David was out running errands. I got in my car and drove to Mom's house. My house, technically, or soon to be mine and my brother's to manage, according to Mom's will, though Chloe seemed determined to insert herself as the primary decision-maker. I still had my key. My hands trembled slightly as I approached the familiar front door. I just wanted the photos. I'd be in and out. What could be the harm? Before my key even touched the lock, the door swung open. Chloe stood there. She was dressed in expensive-looking athleisure wear, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, there was a small, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. "Sarah," she said, her voice smooth as silk, but with an undertone that set my teeth on edge. "What are you doing here?" It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "I came for Mom's box of photos, Chloe," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "The one from her bedroom closet." The smirk widened, just a fraction. "Oh, I don't think so." She didn't move from the doorway, effectively blocking my path. Her stance was casual, but her eyes were like chips of ice. "Excuse me?" I felt a flush of anger creep up my neck. "This is still my mother's house. Those are my family's memories." "Actually," Chloe said, shifting her weight slightly, "Mark and I have decided it's best if we handle everything here, for now, until probate is completely settled." She tilted her head, her expression one of mock sympathy. "You're just so emotional about all this, Sarah. It's understandable, but it's probably better if you're not rummaging around. It could complicate things with the lawyer." "Complicate things?" I echoed, incredulous. "My wanting to look at pictures of my own family complicates things?" This was beyond absurd. It was cruel. Her calm, condescending tone was more infuriating than any outburst would have been. She was enjoying this petty display of power. Behind Chloe, I saw movement. Mark appeared in the hallway, hovering awkwardly in the background. He looked pale, his eyes darting from me to Chloe and back again, never quite meeting mine. Shame radiated off him in waves. "Mark," I said, my voice pleading now, the anger momentarily eclipsed by a desperate hope that he would see reason, that he would step in. "Mark, please, I just want the photos." He shuffled his feet. He wouldn't look at me. Chloe didn't turn around, didn't even glance at him. She knew. She knew she had him. "Mom," he mumbled, his voice so low I could barely hear it. He was staring at a spot on the porch floor just past my feet. Chloe's right. We're just trying to keep everything straightforward. For the estate." My breath hitched. The casual cruelty of Chloe's stance, the calculated indifference in her eyes was one thing. But this was my son, my Mark, the little boy whose tears I'd dried, whose triumphs I'd celebrated, whose hand I'd held through every childhood fear. And he was standing there, a puppet on her strings, reciting her lines. "Mark, look at me," I whispered. He flinched, but didn't raise his head. "Mom, just let us deal with it, okay?" He mumbled again, the words sounding like ash in his mouth. "It's better this way." Better for whom? I wanted to scream. For Chloe, clearly. She was winning. She was systematically erasing me, not just from the house, but from my son's loyalty, his affection. The betrayal was a physical pain, a vice tightening around my chest, making it hard to breathe. He was choosing her cold ambition, over me, over decades of love and shared history in my own mother's home. Chloe's smirk was no longer subtle. It was a clear, triumphant curve of her lips. She'd won this round, and she knew it. She hadn't even needed to raise her voice. Mark's capitulation was her victory. "You see, Sarah," she said, her voice still unnervingly calm, "it's all being handled, professionally." I looked from her smug face to Mark's downcast one. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a cold, hollow despair. What was the point? Arguing with Chloe was like reasoning with a stone wall, and Mark was lost to me, at least for now. He was so thoroughly under her spell that he couldn't see the damage she was inflicting, the poison she was spreading. I see," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. The words felt like a surrender. Chloe gave a small, satisfied nod. "Good. We'll let you know when it's appropriate for you to collect any personal items." Then, with a final, dismissive glance, she began to close the door. Slowly, deliberately. The click of the latch echoed in the sudden silence of the porch. It was the sound of finality, the sound of a door not just to a house, but to a part of my life, a part of my son, being shut in my face. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the painted wood, the familiar brass knocker that Mom had polished every spring. The scent of the autumn leaves, usually a comfort, now seemed to mock me with its crisp indifference. The sun felt cold on my skin. It wasn't just about a box of photographs anymore. It wasn't even just about Mom's house. It was about Mark, my son. The easy cadence of our relationship, the unspoken understanding that had always existed between us, was gone, replaced by this horrifying deference to a woman who clearly despised me. He was a stranger, looking at me with eyes that reflected her cold ambition, her manipulative heart. I turned away from the closed door, a profound, chilling emptiness spreading through me. Losing Mom had been devastating, but this feeling of being actively, cruelly pushed out by my own son, under the orchestration of a woman I now saw as a viper in our nest. This felt like a death of a different kind. It wasn't just a house I was losing Mark. And that, I realized with a sickening certainty, was a wound far deeper, a betrayal that might never heal. The fight for Mom's legacy had just become a fight for my son's soul. The weeks that followed were a blur of numb disbelief and a grief so profound it settled in my bones. David was my anchor, his quiet fury on my behalf a small warming coal in the icy landscape of my emotions. He'd tried talking to Mark again, man to man, but Mark was defensive, reciting Chloe's carefully constructed arguments about process and emotional overinvestment. It was like talking to a well-programmed automaton. I was a librarian. I knew about narratives, about how stories could shape perception. Chloe was crafting a masterpiece of manipulation, and Mark was her captive audience. My attempts to engage with the estate lawyer Chloe had found were met with polite, infuriating stonewalling. All communications, he'd implied, should ideally go through Chloe and Mark, as they were spearheading the organizational aspects. I was being systematically sidelined, reduced to a grieving, emotional old woman incapable of rational thought. The rage simmered, a constant low burn beneath the surface of my sorrow. Then came the call that changed everything. It was from a woman named Susan, someone I vaguely knew, from a local book club Chloe had briefly joined, presumably to network or project some image of community involvement. Susan's voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Sarah? It's Susan Davies. We met at the book club a while back with Chloe." "Susan, yes, I remember," I said, puzzled. We'd exchanged pleasantries, nothing more. "Look, this is really awkward," Susan continued, her voice dropping lower. "But I had coffee with Chloe a couple of days ago. She was talking a lot." An icy premonition snaked down my spine. "Oh." "Yeah, I don't know how to put this politely. She was bragging." Susan sounded genuinely uncomfortable and a little disgusted. About Mark, mostly. How he's so easy to manage, her words. How she's got him completely on board with selling your mother's house as soon as probate clears. She said they're going to flip it, make a huge profit, and finally get a decent place, away from all the old baggage. Each word was a fresh stab. Old baggage. That was me. That was Mom's memory. "She said," Susan's voice faltered for a moment, "she said you were being a bitter, interfering old crone about it all, but that Mark was finally manning up and listening to her, his wife, instead of his mommy. Susan paused, then added, with a distinct note of revulsion, "And she laughed, Sarah. She actually laughed when she said he was so wrapped around her little finger it was almost too easy." Why? I sat down heavily on the kitchen chair, the phone pressed hard against my ear. The casual cruelty, the sheer, unadulterated contempt in Chloe's reported words, it was breathtaking. This wasn't just about a house or money. This was about power, about dismantling my family, about isolating Mark and remaking him in her image. "Susan," I managed, my voice hoarse, "why are you telling me this?" There was a sigh on the other end of the line. "Because it was disgusting, Sarah. Honestly, I barely know Chloe, but the way she spoke, it was just vile. Nobody deserves to be talked about like that, especially not by family. And the way she dismissed Mark, even while claiming to control him, it just felt wrong, profoundly wrong." Susan continued, "I don't usually meddle, but I couldn't just let it go. I felt you needed to know what you're really up against. She's not just ambitious, she's venomous." I was silent for a moment, processing the sheer audacity of Chloe's malice and the unexpected decency of this near stranger. "Thank you, Susan," I said, the words inadequate. "Thank you for telling me." "There's more," Susan said, and I braced myself. I have a habit of recording voice memos on my phone when I have a lot on my mind, or if I'm in a meeting and want to remember details. It's just an old habit. And when Chloe started her tirade, I instinctively hit record. I don't even know why, really. Maybe some part of me knew it was important. My heart leaped. "You recorded her?" "Most of it, yeah," Susan confirmed. "Her whole spiel about Mark, the house. It's all there. I listened back to it, just to make sure I wasn't imagining how awful it was. I wasn't." She paused. "I wasn't sure what to do with it. It feels, I don't know, like a violation. But then I thought about what she said and how she said it. And I thought you deserved to have the truth, Sarah. Undiluted." A recording. Chloe's own words, her true voice, captured. A tiny, fierce spark of something that wasn't despair ignited within me. Hope? No, not yet, but something harder. Resolve. "Susan," I said, my voice firmer now, would you be willing to let me hear it? Or have a copy?" "That's why I called, Sarah," she said quietly. "I can email it to you. What you do with it is your business. But I thought, well, forewarned is forearmed, right?" The email arrived a few minutes later. An audio file innocuously labeled "Voice Memo Coffee Chat." My hand trembled as I clicked download, then play. David was due home soon. I wanted to hear it alone first. The recording started with the clatter of coffee cups, faint background chatter. Then Chloe's voice, clear and bright, laced with that false sweetness I now recognized as her default weapon. She was laughing about something trivial with Susan. Then the shift. The casual, dismissive tone as she began to dissect my family. Hearing her actual words, not just Susan's summary, was like being doused in ice water. The arrogance, the smug superiority, the way she spoke about Mark, my little puppet, so easy to lead. He just needs a strong woman to tell him what to think, and his mother certainly wasn't it. It was a calculated dismantling of his character, his agency, all while positioning herself as his savior. And then her words about me. The old crone just can't let go. She thinks that dusty old mausoleum is some kind of shrine. Honestly, it's embarrassing." She laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "But Mark's finally seeing sense. He knows our future is more important than her sentimental nonsense. We'll sell it, get top dollar, and never look back." The recording ended. I sat in stunned silence, the echo of Chloe's venomous pronouncements hanging in the air of my quiet living room. The pain was still there, a deep, throbbing ache for my son, for the respect and love she was systematically stripping away. But now, something else was crystallizing alongside it. A cold, hard anger, a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. She hadn't just underestimated me. She had underestimated everyone, including the casual acquaintance she'd chosen as her confidant. She'd been so sure of her own cleverness, so cocooned in her arrogance, that she'd exposed her rotten core. David came home then, found me sitting in the dim light, the laptop open. He saw my face, the unshed tears, the set of my jaw. "Sarah, what is it? What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. "David," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, I think Chloe just handed me the weapon I need." I played it for him. His face went from concern to disbelief, then to a quiet, simmering rage that mirrored my own. He didn't say much, just held my hand tightly, but I saw the understanding in his eyes. The gloves were off. A few days later, my phone rang. Caller, ID, Chloe. My stomach did a small, nervous flip, but my hand was steady as I answered. "Sarah, darling." Her voice was a confection of saccharine sweetness. "How are you holding up?" Darling. The hypocrisy was almost laughable. "I'm managing, Chloe," I said, my tone carefully neutral. Good, good. Well, listen, Mark and I were thinking, now that the initial shock has passed and things with the estate are moving along so smoothly thanks to our lawyer. Smoothly, right. We thought it would be lovely to have a small family dinner at Mom's house, to celebrate her memory, share some stories. Kind of a cleansing, a way to move forward together. At Mom's house, her audacity was boundless. A victory lap, no doubt. A chance for her to play the gracious hostess in the home she was already mentally renovating and selling. A chance to further solidify her control over Mark, to parade her triumph. "We were thinking next Saturday," she chirped. "Just us, Mark, you, David. Maybe your brother Michael, if he can make it. Keep it intimate." I thought of the recording, sitting on my laptop, a digital serpent coiled and ready to strike. I thought of her smug, contemptuous voice. I thought of Mark's lost, confused eyes. A slow, cold smile touched my own lips, one that David, watching me from across the room, would later say scared him a little. "Chloe," I said, my voice matching her manufactured sweetness. "That sounds lovely. A wonderful idea to honor Mom." There was a slight pause, as if she was surprised by my easy acquiescence. "Oh, good. I'm so glad you think so, Sarah. Mark will be thrilled." "Yes," I said, the small digital recorder Susan had given me feeling like a talisman in my pocket where I'd started carrying it. "I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world." As I hung up, the image of Chloe's perfectly constructed world about to shatter was vivid in my mind. The dinner wouldn't be a celebration of Mom's memory, not in the way Chloe envisioned. It would be a reckoning. And I held the fuse. The question was no longer if I would light it, but how spectacularly the explosion would be. The week leading up to Chloe's family dinner crawled by with agonizing slowness. Each day felt like a rehearsal for a play I didn't want to be in, yet knew I had to star in. David was a quiet storm of support, his anger at Chloe a palpable force. He'd listened to the recording again, his jaw tight, and simply said, "She needs to be exposed, Sarah, for Mark's sake, as much as yours." My brother Michael, when I'd reluctantly called and given him a heavily edited version of the situation, agreed to come, mostly out of a sense of familial duty and a simmering dislike for Chloe he'd never openly voiced, but I'd always sensed. Saturday evening arrived, cloaked in a crisp autumn chill. As David and I drove to Mom's house, my stomach was a knot of anxiety and a strange, almost giddy anticipation. The small digital recorder felt heavy in my purse. This wasn't just about exposing Chloe. It was about trying to reclaim my son from the fog of her influence. What if it backfired? What if Mark was too far gone? Mom's house looked different. Chloe had certainly been busy. There were new, pristine white mums in pots on the porch. Inside, the familiar scent of Mom's lavender was overlaid with something sharp and generically clean, like a hotel lobby. Some of Mom's cherished, slightly worn furniture had been shifted, replaced in prominence by newer, colder pieces I didn't recognize. It was subtle, but it felt like an erasure, a deliberate scrubbing away of Mom's presence. Chloe greeted us at the door, a vision in a cream-colored cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored slacks. Her smile was dazzling, her eyes glittering with a triumph she barely bothered to conceal. "Sarah, David, so glad you could make it," she trilled, air-kissing me. It felt like being brushed by a cold reptile. Mark stood behind her, looking like a well-dressed ghost. He offered a wan smile, his eyes avoiding mine. The change in him was heartbreaking. The spark, the easy humor I loved, was gone, replaced by a kind of wary tension. He looked like a man walking a tightrope. My brother Michael arrived shortly after, his expression carefully neutral, but his handshake with Chloe was notably brief. The atmosphere in the dining room was thick with unspoken things. Chloe chattered brightly, pointing out the small improvements she'd made. New, stark white placemats, a minimalist floral centerpiece that looked like it belonged in a modern art gallery, not Mom's cozy dining room. She'd even used Mom's best china, the set reserved for Christmas and Easter, and it felt like a sacrilege, another piece of Mom co-opted for Chloe's stage. Dinner was an exercise in strained politeness. Chloe dominated the conversation, recounting anecdotes that subtly highlighted her efficiency, her decisiveness, her plans for our future, a future that clearly revolved around the swift acquisition and disposal of Mom's assets. Mark picked at his food, occasionally offering a monosyllabic agreement when Chloe directed a comment his way. David and Michael exchanged a few loaded glances. I mostly listened, a strange calm settling over me. The die was cast. As Chloe served dessert, a pretentious, deconstructed apple tart that looked nothing like Mom's comforting pies, she raised her wine glass. "Well," she began, beaming at Mark, then around the table, "I just want to say how lovely it is to have us all here, in this new chapter, to honor my Mom Sue, of course, but also to look forward. Mark and I are so excited about the future, about making this house, well, making the most of its potential." She gave Mark a possessive smile. This was my cue. Before anyone could respond, I cleared my throat. "Chloe, that's lovely," I said, my voice surprisingly even. "And speaking of honoring Mom and family, I'd like to share a few words myself, if that's all right." Chloe looked momentarily surprised, then her gracious hostess mask slipped back on. "Of course, Sarah. Please." She probably expected a tearful, sentimental tribute. I reached into my purse and took out the small digital recorder. I placed it on the white placemat in front of me. The room fell silent. Even Chloe's bright chatter ceased. Mark finally looked directly at me, a flicker of confusion, maybe apprehension, in his eyes. "I recently came into possession of something," I began, my gaze sweeping from Chloe's suddenly wary face to Mark's, then to David and Michael. "Something that speaks volumes about family, about respect, or the lack thereof. It's a recording, and I think everyone here, especially Mark, needs to hear it. It's about honesty, about what goes on when people think no one is listening." Chloe's smile froze. Her eyes darted to the recorder, then to my face, a dawning horror in their depths. "Sarah, what are you doing?" she hissed, her voice losing its sugary coating. "This isn't the time or place for—" "Oh, I think it's precisely the time and place, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but firm. And I pressed play. Chloe's voice, confident and laced with contempt, filled the strained silence of Mom's dining room. Her bragging about how Mark was so easy to manage, her dismissive, cruel words about me being a bitter, interfering old crone, her gleeful plans to sell Mom's house, that dusty old mausoleum, for a quick profit, and worst of all, her casual, cutting dismissal of Mark as her little puppet, a mommy's boy she had wrapped around her little finger. As her own words, her true, unfiltered thoughts, echoed around the table, Chloe's face underwent a horrifying transformation. The mask of pleasantness shattered, fragmenting into disbelief, then stark terror, then a contorted mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Turn that off!" she shrieked, lunging for the recorder. David's hand shot out, gently but firmly stopping her. "No, Chloe," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Let's all hear it." Mark was staring at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. His face had gone chalky white. His fork clattered from his nerveless fingers onto the china plate. As Chloe's recorded voice mocked his devotion, his intelligence, his very character. I saw his eyes widen, then film with a dawning, devastating understanding. The fog wasn't just lifting, it was being violently ripped away. He slowly turned his head, not to Chloe, but to me, his expression one of raw, unutterable pain and shame. It was the look of a man who has suddenly seen the abyss he's been led to. When the recording finally ended, the silence was deafening. Chloe was sputtering, her face flushed an ugly red. That's taken out of context. It's lies. She's trying to poison you against me, Mark." But Mark wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, his eyes filled with a terrible, newfound clarity. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking, Is that really how she talks about me? About you?" "Yes, Mark," I said gently. "That's Chloe, when she thinks you can't hear her." He turned to Chloe then, and the look on his face was something I'd never seen before. A cold, hard disillusionment that seemed to age him years in an instant. "All this time," he said, his voice barely audible but vibrating with suppressed fury. All those things you said about Mom, about needing to be strong, to stand up for our future. It was all just this?" He gestured vaguely at the recorder, at the ruins of their carefully constructed facade. Chloe opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, she seemed to have no words. Her perfectly constructed world had crumbled around her, brought down by her own arrogance and the unexpected integrity of a casual acquaintance with a recording app. The rest of the evening was a chaotic blur. Chloe alternated between furious denials, tearful pleas, and venomous accusations. Mark, however, was resolute. He told her, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, to pack her things from their apartment. He said he needed space, needed to think. But we all knew it was over. The divorce was, as predicted, messy. Chloe fought, of course, but the recording, authenticated by a very willing Susan Davies, became Exhibit A. It painted a clear picture of manipulation and emotional abuse. Chloe left with significantly less than she'd schemed for. Getting Mark back wasn't instant. There was shame, deep and painful, on his part. There were long talks, apologies that came from a place of genuine remorse. He'd been played expertly by a master manipulator who had preyed on his insecurities and his desire to be a good husband. "How could I have been so blind, Mom?" he asked me weeks later, sitting in Mom's familiar kitchen, which was slowly starting to feel like itself again. "How could I have let her turn me against you?" "She was good at it, Mark," I said, stroking his hand. "And you wanted to believe in her. That's not a crime. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but he was my son, and he was free. Mom's house, it's still here, filled with love again, not lies." Mark and I, with David's steady help, sorted through Mom's things at our own pace, sharing memories, laughter, and a few tears. The photos from the shoebox are now in albums, displayed proudly. The house isn't a mausoleum. It's a home filled with the echoes of Mom's love and the promise of new memories for our healing family. Chloe tried to steal its heart, our family's heart. All she got was a taste of her own poison and an eviction notice from Mark's life. The justice was swift, and yes, it was oh so sweet. The house is quiet now, a peaceful, healing quiet. Mark visits often, his eyes clear, his laughter genuine again. But sometimes, late at night, when the old house settles and creaks, I find myself wondering. A viper, once scorned, rarely loses its venom entirely. Chloe is out there somewhere, and I know with a chilling certainty that while this chapter is closed, the echoes of her malice might linger, a faint, cautionary whisper in the corners of our hard-won peace. Thanks for listening to my story. Please share it with anyone else who might enjoy it, and subscribe to the Timeless Justice channel for more stories of justice.